Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. If you're still here after all that, you already know the kind of stories we tell. The kind that crawl under your skin, that echo in the quiet when the episode ends. If you want to carry a piece of that darkness with you, wear what haunts you. Our exclusive line of merch is made for listeners who feel more at home in the uncanny, the unspoken, the things that don't make sense in the daylight. Shirts, hoodies, and other gear, designed with that same atmosphere of dread, mystery, and whispered wrongness. Candles support the channel, feed the stories. You can grab yours at https://theshadowsprintify me, and as always, don't look behind you. The Borrowed Howl, Chapter 1. The silence above all things Four Corners region. Navajo Nation borderlands. Elijah Sutter had always believed that true silence could be found in the desert. Not the polite silence of padded rooms or snow-covered forests, but the primordial kind, raw, ancient, the kind that presses against your skin like a second atmosphere. He first felt it on the drive-in, as the paved roads fell away to clay-packed dirt, and the jagged mesas of the Four Corners region rose like broken vertebrae against the sky. Canyon Wren Tower wasn't on any map. You reached it by turning off Highway 64 at a rusted cattle gate with no sign, and following a 2-mile service road, winding through sun-baked juniper and sandstone boulders. The last quarter mile was too steep for his truck. He hiked it with his gear slung across his back, sweat crawling down his spine, boots crunching over dry gravel that sounded too loud in the absence of anything else. The lookout tower sat perched atop a crag of red rock, 7,000 feet above sea level, its stilts creaking faintly in the heat. A steel-framed glass cabin with a wraparound balcony and a view that spanned 2 states. To the west, Arizona's high desert stretching endlessly beneath a sky too big to comprehend. To the east, a labyrinth of canyons so deep they swallowed light before noon. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Dust motes hung in amber shafts of sunlight, dancing above a desk bolted to the floor and a cot shoved against the far wall. A radio, a weather chart, a filing cabinet with rusted edges. No TV, no cell reception. Just what he wanted, what he needed. He unpacked methodically, placing his old Tascam field recorder and shotgun mic on the table like sacred tools. He brought 24 blank cassettes and a leather-bound journal he hadn't touched since the day his brother died. The pages still smelled faintly of cedar. Micah had loved the idea of Elijah coming here. "You'll find what's left of yourself up there," he'd said during their last call. "Out where nothing can drown you out." And that had stuck with him, because for Elijah, the world had always been too loud. Cities roared. People shouted when they didn't need to. Even memories had noise, echoes he couldn't quiet down. That's what drove him to sound engineering in the first place. He didn't just love silence, he hunted it. He sat on the cot and stared out at the canyon, where wind slipped between stone ridges like breath through broken teeth. He exhaled. No cars, no sirens, no voices, just howl. He stiffened. It came from far off, maybe 2 or 3 canyons over. A single high-pitched note, drifting across the desert on a thermal. At first, he thought it was a coyote, but it didn't rise and fall like an animal cry. It warbled slightly, like an off-key tape rewinding. He stood and walked out onto the deck, listened, waited. The wind returned. Nothing more, probably just some echo catching on the rock. Sound behaved strangely out here. You could whisper near a sandstone arch and hear yourself an hour later, or scream into the canyon and hear a different voice scream back. He didn't think much more of it. That night, the stars came out in brutal clarity, like someone had thrown a handful of salt across black velvet. Elijah recorded a minute of silence just to capture the hush. The mic picked up the faint buzz of crickets, the soft metal groan of the tower shifting in the breeze, and underneath it, something else. Not a sound exactly, not yet, morely like a space where a sound should be. Chapter 2, a hollow between calls. Elijah woke before dawn. There was something about the tower, the way it swayed just enough in the wind, the way light didn't rise but bled slowly through the cracks between mesa and sky, that turned sleep into something porous. His dreams didn't have edges anymore, just feelings, a heavy weight on his chest, voices behind glass, a constant, breathless waiting. He got up and brewed a cup of burnt, instant coffee, still half asleep as he stepped outside onto the metal grating of the observation deck. The air was dry and sharp, not quite cold, but not warm either, like the desert couldn't decide what it was yet. A soft wind crept through the juniper trees below, rattling the stiff green needles like bones in a can. In every direction, the world was red and gold and quiet. Too quiet. He liked it. From up here, even his own thoughts felt like they needed permission to speak. Elijah settled into the morning routine. He logged the temperature, wind speed, cloud patterns, scanned the tree length through his binoculars for any hint of smoke, updated the daily fire index, and relayed it via shortwave to a station in Farmington, where a woman with a pinched voice acknowledged him with a bored "Copy that, Canyon Wren." He didn't mind the monotony. It was honest, clean, like scrubbing rust off a part of himself he'd let go too long untouched. And there was comfort in repetition, knowing what came next, what was expected. He only broke the pattern once. At 9:47 a.m., he retrieved the field recorder from where he'd left it overnight on the edge of the deck. It was an old habit from his engineering days, recording ambient soundscapes in different environments. He'd planned to collect a few quiet tapes for himself, maybe turn them into a sound collage back in the city. But when he pressed play, he paused, the usual static, a bit of wind, the rattle of the railing under pressure. Then a thump, faint, like a boot step, then silence. Then a sound that didn't belong. It was soft, almost buried under the wind shear. You wouldn't notice it unless you were listening for the wrong thing. A tremor in the high frequencies, a pitch flutter that bent around the edges of normal sound. A howl again, but this time different. Elijah leaned in, rewound, played it again. Not a coyote, not a wolf, not a thing born from muscle and instinct. It was too smooth, like someone imitating a howl who didn't understand what made it animal. The cadence was wrong. It rose on the wrong beat, ended in a hiccup that felt almost embarrassed. And then, layered beneath it, maybe just for a second, something fainter than a whisper, a word, or the shape of one. Elijah! He stopped the tape. His skin broke out in a fine chill. Not fear exactly. More-like confusion finding its way through the bones. He rewound again, adjusted the gain, isolated the frequency. He wanted to believe it was pareidolia, his brain turning patterns into something it understood. Just a trick of acoustics, the way echoes stretched and reshaped themselves across canyons. But the syllables were too clean, too deliberate, and it sounded like Micah. He spent the rest of the day convincing himself it wasn't. That evening, Elijah took his dinner, a lukewarm can of lentil soup, onto the deck. The sky was on fire, striated with crimson and sulfur yellow as the sun slid beneath the cliffs. Shadows grew long and thin, like old fingers reaching across the desert floor. He turned his recorder off for the night. Instead, he listened with his own ears. The air vibrated differently now, not louder, just more aware, like the space around him had grown ears of its own. He heard coyotes, distant and real this time, yipping in staccato rhythm like laughter. A bird of prey screamed overhead, circling once before vanishing into the dusk. A bat fluttered past his ear, ordinary sounds, natural, but beneath them all something was missing, a hollowness between calls, a shape in the silence, like someone had scooped out a piece of the world and left it echoing. Elijah didn't want to say the word haunted. That would have been too easy, too cinematic. This wasn't ghosts. This was something older than memory. He watched the sun slip away and felt the night arrive not as absence but as presence, a fullness, a weight settling over the canyon like wet cloth. And somewhere out in that dark, something was listening back. Later that night, he sat at the desk, headphones on, running spectrogram analysis on the recording. It was an old habit from his studio days. He trained himself to see sounds like landscapes, peaks and valleys of frequency, color, noise, floor. Normally, a clean desert night would show up as a blue ocean of low static, maybe with a few bursts of yellow from wind shifts or animal calls. But this file was wrong. There was a shape in the graph, a vertical spike that didn't belong. Not a glitch, not a malfunction. It looked intentional, almost like a fingerprint. He reached out and paused the playback. Just before the spike in the subharmonic register, the sound that sits beneath human hearing, there was a pulse. A second later, a voice, not quite his. Elijah. He turned off the monitor, sat still, stared at the window. The desert outside stared back. Chapter 3. The whisper that wasn't there. Elijah didn't leave the tower for 3 days. Not out of fear, not yet, but because he couldn't stop listening. The strange howl had become an itch behind his ears, a sonic splinter buried too deep to remove. He reviewed the recording on loop, headphones clamped tight, eyes scanning waveforms for patterns his conscious mind couldn't explain. And always just beneath the sound floor, that voice. Elijah. Sometimes it was a whisper, sometimes a child's voice. Once, disturbingly, it matched a voicemail Micah had left him months before the accident. "Hey, just checking in. You doing okay up there in the echo chamber?" That same phrase repeated now, slowed down, warped, buried in the static under the howl. Not copied, not played back, reconstructed. Like something was building a version of Micah from the only thing it could find, the dead air between sounds. On the 4th day, Elijah forced himself outside. He needed to verify what was real, not just in the recording, but out here, under the unflinching sky, where wind sculpted everything into soft ruin. He strapped on his gear, headphones, parabolic microphone, notebook, handheld recorder. Not to collect beauty this time, but to find whatever was mimicking it. He headed northeast toward a bluff overlooking a narrow canyon known as Crow's Sleep, named for how the blackbirds gathered there to die. It was a place of silence, where even the wind avoided sharp edges. The local fire maps labeled it a no-go zone due to unstable rock and old superstition. But Elijah knew silence wasn't always a warning. Sometimes it was a gate. As he walked, his boots scraped through rust-colored dust. Grasshoppers clicked past in low arcs. The parabolic mic picked up every brittle footstep, every breath, every heartbeat, but no birdsong, no insects after the first 100 yards, no ambient echo. The canyon absorbed sound like a sponge. He stopped and swept the mic across the horizon. Crackling, wind, then a laugh, brief, light, female maybe, or a young boy. Echoed once, then gone. He pulled the headphones off and stood perfectly still, gut tightening. There was no one else out here. No hikers, no children, no voices. But there it was again, not in the air, in the playback. This time it whispered. "I'm behind you." He spun. Nothing, just red stone and twisted brush. The canyon lay still as a photograph. He played it again. The whisper remained, but he hadn't heard it live, only in the recording. That night, back in the tower, Elijah couldn't stop shaking. He told himself it was dehydration, altitude sickness, stress. He told himself it wasn't real, but the whisper kept playing in his head, even without the headphones. And then something new, a rhythmic tapping. It started just after midnight. Soft, deliberate, like fingers drumming against glass. He got out of bed, heart in his throat, and checked the windows. Nothing there. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the recorder. He picked it up. It wasn't turned on. The cassette inside hadn't been moved, but the tape was spooling. Slowly, quietly, playing something. He raised it to his ear, Micah's voice. Clearer this time, no distortion. "You can't keep me out, not forever." Elijah dropped the recorder. The plastic casing cracked. The sound stopped. He stared at it on the floor, unmoving. No lights, no power. But as he reached down to pick it up, he heard it again. Not from the recorder, from the door. "Elijah!" It was his own voice, calling from the dark. Chapter 4. The playback. Elijah didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat in the corner of the tower's single room with the recorder still lying cracked on the floor, watching it like it might move. Outside, the wind picked up, dragging dust across the metal deck. But the sound that haunted him most was his own name, whispered from the canyon in his own voice. He hadn't imagined it. He was sure, and that made it worse. By morning, the tower was soaked in an uncanny stillness, like everything outside was holding its breath. The insects hadn't returned. The birds were gone. No coyotes, not even the familiar moan of wind through the brush. The only thing moving was the static in his mind. He powered on the backup recorder, a newer digital model. Safer, cleaner, more irrational. No tape, no chance of misread warbles or stretched reels. He pressed record, leaned close to the mic and said quietly, "This is Elijah Sutter, July 9th, 7:24 a.m. I'm recording this because I don't trust the sound anymore, not even my own voice." He paused. Hearing it played back immediately was a comfort. Familiar, concrete. It was something he could own. "Something's mimicking me. I heard myself last night, outside the tower. I didn't say anything, but something did. And it used my name like it knew the shape of it in my throat." Another pause. "I've worked with sound for 17 years. I know what interference sounds like. I know what wind sounds like. This wasn't that." He stopped the recording and hit play, but what came out of the speaker wasn't what he'd said. The voice was his, yes, but the rhythm was wrong, the cadence off. Like a marionette reading a script it hadn't memorized properly. "This is Elijah Sutter, July 9th. I'm recording. I don't trust the sound, not even my voice." Words dropped, shuffled, replaced. The playback skipped once, then continued without any mechanical error. "Something mimicked me. It is me. It said my name. I knew the shape of it in my throat." Elijah's skin crawled. He hadn't said that last part, not in that way, not with that certainty. He tried again, a new file, said a full paragraph aloud. Simple, declarative sentences. Then hit stop, play, same thing. A similar structure, same voice, but something inside the sentences had shifted. The playback wasn't corrupted. It was rewritten to sound more certain, more intentional, like it knew what he meant better than he did. By noon, Elijah had stopped speaking aloud entirely. He walked around the tower with a notepad, scribbling observations in silence. He left the digital recorder on the table and unplugged the batteries from the reel-to-reel. He couldn't be sure which device was the problem, or if the problem was with him. When he accidentally kicked the cracked recorder by the cot, it made a soft clicking sound. He bent down. The reel was turning. No power, no battery, no external mic, just spinning. A voice came through. "It's okay. I'll speak for you." He hurled the recorder off the balcony. It hit the rocks below with a sharp clack and vanished into the juniper brush. He stood shaking at the railing, listening. No wind, no reply, just silence. That night, as darkness sealed the canyon shut like a mouth, Elijah left a single note on the desk. "If anyone finds this, and you hear me speak, make sure it's really me." Then he sat in bed, headphones on, recorder off. He waited. Just before 3 a.m., a sound tapped at the glass. Not a knock, a mimicry of one. He held his breath, not daring to move. Then, faint and deliberate from just beyond the door, "Elijah, let me back in." His own voice. And this time it was perfect. Not just the sound, the pacing, the warmth, the exhausted way he said his own name after too many sleepless nights. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself in silence. And across the room, the recorder whispered it back. Chapter 5. A voice not my own. The wind that night was all teeth. It came down from the mesas in snarling gusts, dragging the scent of dust, juniper, and something else, something like scorched fur. Dalton cinched his jacket tighter around his chest and adjusted the gain on the field recorder, watching the levels twitch like heart monitors. He stood outside the tower again, crouched by the east-facing railing, where the canyons opened like a yawning throat. He began hearing them just past midnight. Voices in the howl, not words at first, just a rhythm. Pauses where speech should be. An uncanny cadence that reminded him of people trying to breathe through sobs. Then came a sound that stopped his breath cold. A single, rising wail that began as something canine, twisted through something human, and ended in a note that mimicked a cry he hadn't heard in over 10 years. "Help!" He froze. That wasn't from the canyon. That was inside the tower. Dalton didn't move. He didn't blink. He just listened, heart screaming in his ears, as the whisper seemed to crawl across the floorboards behind him. Slowly he turned. No one was there. He backed into the tower, closing the door and locking it with shaking hands. He rewound the tape on the recorder, unsure whether he wanted proof or denial. It clicked softly as it whirred back to the moment. Then he pressed play. What came through the speaker was not what he'd heard in real time. First, static, then a faint wind. Then the voice again, "Dalton, please." It wasn't just a voice. It was his, soft, guttural, pleading. His own voice, whispering his name like someone dying in the dark. He recoiled from the recorder. It clattered to the floor, still playing. "Let me in." Dalton lunged and yanked the batteries free. Silence flooded the tower. He sat on the floor, hands trembling. He stared at the recorder, half expecting it to speak again, even without power. The weight of what he just heard made the air feel thick, almost solid in his lungs. He stayed awake until dawn, watching the glass of the windows reflect only himself. Listening. He couldn't stop thinking about how the voice knew his name, how it matched his breath, his tone, his pauses, how it knew him. And the question that settled like rot into the back of his skull: was the voice pretending to be him, or was it something that had already taken part of him? Chapter 6. Where voices go by morning, the wind had died, but Dalton couldn't shake the sound of his own voice begging from the recorder. The tower felt smaller than ever, its walls thinner, the floorboards more brittle. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just drifted in and out of waking dreams where his own mouth moved without permission, whispering things he didn't understand. He stared at the field recorder on the desk, now wrapped tightly in an old towel and stuffed inside an ammo box. He hadn't touched it since pulling the batteries, and yet he swore, at one point just before dawn, he'd heard a soft ticking sound, like it was trying to play something back despite being powerless. Dalton lit the camp stove and poured himself a cup of coffee. The metal mug trembled slightly in his grip. He stared out the east-facing window again. The canyon below was empty, stark, still. Then he remembered something. The ranger before him, Ben Garner. He'd never met the man, only read about him in the logs, simple maintenance reports, supply lists, uneventful shifts. But something about the entries had always struck him as odd. They'd ended abruptly in late September the year before. The file just stopped. No final log. No goodbye, no explanation. Dalton had assumed the guy rotated out or quit, but now he wasn't so sure. Dalton dug into the station's archive binder. Thin, faded pages. He found the last entry. September 26. Heard it again, different this time. It said, "Don't forget me," came from below the North Ridge. "I'm going to check it out before the weather shifts," leaving the extra batteries in the drawer. That was it. No record of him coming back, no follow-up. Just that, like a ghost slipping out of a page. Dalton put the binder down and went to the desk. The drawer was still there. He opened it. Inside, sure enough, was a plastic bag of batteries. But also, tucked in the back was something else. A mini-disc recorder. Dusty, obsolete, taped shut. He stared at it. Torn between caution and obsession, Dalton carefully peeled away the tape and powered the device on with fresh batteries. One file, dated September 26. He hit play. The audio was warped by time, but the first 30 seconds were nothing but wind and boots on gravel. Then, breathing, nervous, labored, a man's voice. North Ridge. Think I see something by the canyon mouth. It's standing still. Can't tell if it's Jesus, that's my voice. A long pause, the sound of footsteps slowing, then screaming wind, louder, piercing, followed by another voice layered under it. It didn't belong to Ben, it was a child's voice. Then a woman's. Then two men, overlapping in uncanny sync, each with a different timbre, but the same inflection, the same rhythm. And finally, a single word, stretched long like a signal dragged through static. Hollow, Dalton's stomach turned. The voice was wrong. Too close. It wasn't just near the mic. It was in the mic. Like it had never been recorded through it, but into it. Like the voices had crawled inside and nested. He stopped the playback, stepped away. But even with the recorder off, even with the air dead still, he thought he could still hear it. A residual whisper in the back of his teeth. A vibration behind the eyes. It didn't feel like an echo. It felt like the voice was waiting. He took the mini-disc recorder and sealed it back in the drawer. Then he made a note in his own log. Not because he planned to keep a record, but because something in him feared that if he vanished like Ben, someone might come after. And they'd need to know. He wrote carefully. September 19. If you find this, don't follow the voices. Don't record them. They learn. They remember. I think they copy you. And once they do, I don't know where your voice goes, but I think it leaves with them. Outside, the wind began again, soft at first. then layered, multiple tones, like it was trying to form words, like it was warming up. Chapter 7. That wasn't me. Dalton didn't speak for the first few hours of the morning. He didn't eat, didn't radio into the ranger station like usual. He simply sat at his tiny kitchen table, the busted field recorder on the counter, its battery pack splayed open like a ribcage. Outside, the sky was a flat grey sheet. No clouds, no sun, just the kind of oppressive neutral that made time feel like it wasn't passing at all. Every time he looked at the recorder, he felt it, a kind of pulling in the chest, as if his own lungs were still echoing with that wrong voice. His voice, but not, "Let me in, Dalton." That brittle, breathless mimicry still itched at the inside of his skull. He kept telling himself it was an echo, a trick of the wind, some weird electromagnetic anomaly that made the recorder pick up a past broadcast. That was the rational answer, and he clung to it with white knuckles because the alternative, the thought that something was learning how to be him, wasn't something he could sit with and stay sane. But then came the knock, 3 raps, clear, measured, on the tower door. He stared at it. It was barely past 10 in the morning. No one hiked out here without calling ahead, especially not this early in the season. He hadn't seen another human being in nearly a week. He approached slowly, quietly, half expecting the door to open on its own again, like the night it howled his name. "Hello," he called out, voice hoarse. No answer. He opened the door. Nothing was there, not no one, nothing. The air was still. No wind, no animals, not even birdsong. The silence was suffocating. And then, just at the edge of hearing, something whispered again. Only this time it wasn't calling him. It was humming. A low, tuneless hum. Familiar. Like the song his mother used to sing while making tea, something wordless, meant to soothe. He staggered back from the door, heart racing, and slammed it shut. The hum didn't stop. It was inside now. He moved to the bathroom mirror, not sure why. He just needed to look at himself, confirm himself. He studied his face, trying to find some evidence he was still the original version. His lips, his eyes, the curve of his jaw. But his reflection didn't quite match the rhythm of his breath. It lagged just slightly, 1 second behind. He stepped away from the mirror. That wasn't him. The hum deepened. He heard the floor creak in the far corner of the room, one of the spots where the boards always groaned when he moved. But this time, he hadn't moved. He grabbed the emergency flare from the wall, a flare gun from the survival kit. He had no plan, just instinct. Something was here, and it knew how to wear him like a skin of sound. And he was done pretending this was a phenomenon. Whatever it was, it wanted to replace him, not physically, not violently. It wanted to overwrite him, to speak him into silence. He raised the flare gun. The hum stopped. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was listening. He said, "If you're going to kill me, do it. But you won't wear my voice." For the first time in hours, he felt alone again. Utterly alone. But that night, as the canyon wind stirred again and the moon rose silver over the cliffs, a new voice came through the recorder on his desk. "I don't need to kill you, Dalton. You're already forgetting how to speak." He didn't sleep. Chapter 8. The canyon remembers by morning. Dalton could no longer trust his voice. He tried to call the ranger station, but the words came out wrong. Not mispronounced, dislocated. The vowels felt like they were pushing against each other, colliding midair before they ever left his throat. He kept starting over again and again, trying to say his call sign. Each time it emerged, it felt off-timbre, like a distorted cassette tape trying to mimic a man. He stopped trying. Instead, he packed. Quietly. Deliberately. Not because he had a plan, but because he couldn't stay. The lookout tower, once a place of peace and wide horizons, now felt like a puppet stage. Something was crawling inside his habits, his rituals, his voice. He kept looking over his shoulder, not because he expected to see something, but because part of him wasn't convinced he was the one casting his own shadow. By mid-morning, Dalton had locked the tower behind him and begun the slow descent through the mesa scrubland. He didn't take the trail. That felt too easy, too predictable. He cut diagonally across the shale slope, bushwhacking between ridges, always glancing back at the Firewatch tower, watching for movement. It stood still, but he knew better now. The wind didn't pick up until he reached the sandstone canyon that split the southern edge of the range. a serpentine scar known locally as Yiskahi Nalnish, or the place that works on you. The name came from an old Diné warning that the land wasn't just sacred, it was interactive. It remembered, it echoed, and if you lingered too long, it would start sending parts of yourself back at you, but twisted, refracted, borrowed. He'd laughed when he first read that during orientation. Now, the canyon below him felt like a waiting mouth. As he entered the narrows, the temperature dropped by nearly 15 degrees. The light changed, too. Moory copper, less sky. The rock faces leaned inward like closing palms, and every footfall, every brush of his jacket, every breath, came back to him a fraction too late, distorted and mismatched. Dalton paused, listened, nothing. But that was it. True silence doesn't exist in nature. There's always birdsong, insects, the wind worrying through cracks. But here, nothing. The sound had been taken, devoured. He pressed forward slower now, winding through the choke points and dry arroyos. Then, just around the bend, beneath a natural stone arch, he saw it. The recorder. His recorder. Sitting in the dust like it had been placed there, its red light blinking. He hadn't brought it. Dalton approached it like it might explode. Kneeling slowly, he pressed play. The static clicked. Then his voice spoke from the speaker. "I don't think I'm real anymore. I remember my parents wrong. I remember my own laugh, and it doesn't match how it feels in my throat. I'm starting to think the voice I used all these years wasn't mine. I just wore it like a uniform." He stopped the recording, looked around. Nothing, until a faint cry echoed up from deeper in the canyon. Dalton, the way it dragged the syllables, it was soft. Wounded even, but still his. He stood, didn't run, couldn't, not out of bravery, but because he needed to see it. Needed to know what was learning him from the inside out. So he followed the sound, down through the switchbacks, past a dried-up wash until he found the source of the voice. It was him, crouched near a stone outcrop. Naked, pale, hair matted with red dust. Scratching at the earth like something looking for a grave it forgot it dug. Dalton's breath caught. The thing looked up, met his eyes. It had his face, but none of the light behind the eyes. Its jaw moved like it was still catching up to the idea of words. "Help," it croaked, voice fragmented. Then, from behind Dalton, the wind shifted, and he heard another voice. "Don't trust the echo." He turned. No one turned back. The double was gone, just footprints now, leading deeper into the canyon, but only one set. His. Chapter 9, the mouth in the rocks. The wind had gone still. It was the kind of stillness that made your ears feel like they'd been packed with cotton. No crickets, no gusts, not even the sighing of trees. Only the hush of a canyon holding its breath. For the first time in weeks, Elias left the recorder behind. He didn't know why. Something about the quiet made the act of recording feel profane, as if capturing it might break the silence and call something forward. He walked a narrow game trail along the canyon's edge, a place he rarely explored due to its eroded shale and sudden drop-offs. But tonight, it pulled at him. The moon was an opal eye above the land, fat and yellowed, casting sharp silver lines over the rocks. With each step, Elias felt his sense of self thinning, as if the silence were unraveling him, a little at a time, whisper-thin threads being taken by the breeze he could no longer feel. He came to a natural arch, a thin stone bridge arching over a sheer crevice. The locals called it Coyotes' Smile. On a whim, he crossed it. On the other side lay a flat shelf of stone with a peculiar half-circle depression, the size of a small man curled in fetal position, and beside it a hole in the rock. It wasn't big, maybe 2 feet wide, just large enough for someone to wedge themselves in. It was unnatural, not in shape, it was just a hole. But Elias felt its presence in his teeth, pressure, a wrongness that hummed in bone. The wind still hadn't returned, but from that hole came a trickle of sound. It was not his voice. It used to be his voice. Now it was stretched, gnawed, and worn thin like old tape. It repeated a phrase again and again. "They're listening. Don't let them out. They're listening. Don't let them out." He fell to his knees beside it, trembling. The sound wasn't coming from the hole, he realized. It was coming through it, like the stone itself was acting as a mouthpiece for something deeper, a resonant cavity for a speaker buried in the marrow of the earth. Then, a second voice joined it, a child's voice. It sounded like the little girl from the last recording, the one he'd never heard in person. "He took my laugh," she whispered. "Gave it to the deer. They don't know how to use it right." Elias felt sick. He scrambled back from the hole and accidentally kicked a stone into it. There was no clatter of impact, no echo, no depth, just absence. A void where sound should go to die, and didn't. And then the thing in the hole changed its tone. It spoke in her voice, not the girl. The one he had tried never to remember. The one from the firefight in Kabul. The one who bled out in the rubble while he pressed a useless bandage against her neck. Her name was Maya. "You should have died there with me," the voice crooned. "But instead you brought me here. You wear me in your dreams. You call me in the canyon. You let me out every time you play the tape." Elias stumbled away from the mouth in the rocks, back over the narrow bridge, back down the trail. He didn't stop running until the lookout tower came into view. But the tower wasn't dark. There was light inside, and the recorder was running. From far below, back near the arch, the voice called one last time. This time it was him, begging, "Don't let me out." He slammed the door shut behind him, bracing it with an axe handle, though he wasn't sure what good it would do. Upstairs, the recorder clicked off. Chapter 10. A voice too close, the tower felt like a prison now. Elias sat on the floor beside his cot, knees to his chest, staring at the recorder on the desk as if it were a loaded gun. It hadn't turned back on, not yet, but he knew it would. It always did, and never when it made sense. Not with his hands, not with his breath, not with anything he did. The air inside the tower had grown thick, heavy with a silence that was no longer empty, but watching. It pressed against his eardrums, not with volume, but with intention, like something was listening through his skull, waiting for a crack. The voice had mimicked Maya. That wasn't just mimicry, that was memory. And only he was supposed to have that. He barely remembered reaching for the satellite phone. He didn't even remember dialing. But when a voice finally crackled through the speaker, he nearly wept. "Dispatch. Go ahead, Tower 11. Elias tried to steady his voice. "I need to report, I don't know what. Something's wrong here. I think someone's in the canyon. Maybe several people. Children, maybe. They're imitating sounds, words. They knew things they shouldn't. They got inside my..." A pause, too long. Then a different voice came on the line. "Mr. Mears, this is Chief Parks. We got your report last week. You said you were just recording wind patterns. Nothing abnormal." "That wasn't me," Elias hissed. "I never sent a report last week." A longer pause now. The voice came back colder. "Well, someone using your access code and voice print did. We checked the logs, audio confirmation. We even heard you say the word false alarm." Elias stood slowly. The phone slipped from his hand. Voice print. Something had been pretending to be him. The cassette recorder on the desk clicked. It hadn't turned on. It clicked like something moving inside it. The sound of an old tape spool rewinding. He stepped toward it, one hand trembling above the stop button. But the machine began playing on its own. Not a tape, not even a voice. Breathing, but not his. And then singing. A nursery rhyme, sung in a pitch just off from human. The words were blurred, as if through wet glass. But the melody was unmistakable. It was the lullaby Maya used to hum. One she'd sung to herself to keep calm in the field. The song cut out with a snap. And then came the voice. His own, but reversed. Like something learning how to speak him. Then it corrected. It said, "He left his mouth here. I wore it. I waited. Now he'll listen to me." The recorder burst into static. Elias backed away until he hit the wall. His heartbeat wasn't a pulse anymore. It was language, thudding messages into his ribs, trying to warn him, trying to confess something he had buried too deep. He looked to the open notebook beside the recorder. Dozens of pages filled with audio logs, but one page was different. One line over and over, written in a hand not his own, repeating, "What you name will name you back. What you name will name you back. What you name will name you back." Outside, the wind picked up, but this wasn't the desert wind. It was wet. It carried the smell of stone that had never seen sun. And beneath it, a low-frequency groan echoed up from the canyon. Not a howl, a breath. Something in the canyon had been waiting to be remembered. And now it was inside his voice, his logs, his tapes, his head, and it was done waiting. The tower creaked. Then, from beneath the trapdoor to the first floor, something knocked. Once, twice. Then a voice too close to his ear to be outside whispered, "Let me finish the tape." Chapter 11. The voice behind the mouth, the forest, was no longer the same place he had watched over for months. Every tree felt too still, every breeze too purposeful. There were no birds anymore. He hadn't heard a single one in days. The air, brittle and dry, smelled like copper and old stone, and the sky seemed constantly bruised, even when it wasn't overcast. Nathan sat in the corner of the lookout tower with his knees drawn to his chest and the recorder clutched in both hands. His beard had grown in coarse patches, and his skin, sunburned and sleepless, had taken on a faint tremor. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Water tasted like metal. He couldn't be sure what was real anymore, but he still knew his own voice. At least he thought he did. The recorder clicked. He had stopped playing it long ago, but now it seemed to turn itself on whenever it liked. He had removed the batteries, thrown them out the window, still it spoke. That night, it didn't play a howl. It didn't mimic a child's voice or a coyote or the sound of his own whimpering from last week. It whispered a single sentence. "You are saying this aloud." Nathan's breath caught. He hadn't spoken. He swore he hadn't. But when the recorder repeated the sentence, he felt a movement in his jaw, slow, automatic, like a ventriloquist's dummy suddenly becoming aware of the hand inside it. He covered his mouth and shook his head. The recorder spoke again. "You are repeating what you hear." Terror lanced through his stomach. His mouth had moved again, not words exactly, but a mirroring, a mimicry of sound. His tongue had shifted against his teeth to make the shape of the sentence, unbidden. He threw the recorder against the wall. It cracked. Then, unbelievably, it laughed. A dry, breathless sound, not mechanical, not human, something between. He scrambled away from it like it was venomous, knocking over a chair. The recording continued on a loop now, voice after voice, sentence after sentence. Not just his, but voices from the past. Childlike, feminine, ancient and trembling, injured, angry, howling, all using his mouth. "Return me," one sobbed. "You took my voice. Please let me out. She's in the pine needles. I saw her spine. Don't listen. Don't let it finish you." Nathan collapsed to his knees and began sobbing into his shirt, trying to muffle the echoes from his own chest. His throat felt like it had been used by something else. Not saw used, a vessel, a hollow. He thought of the canyon again. The carved-out mouth of the land, how it swallowed sound and returned it mangled, rearranged. That was it, wasn't it? The land listened, and the thing in it collected. A library of stolen cries. His last field report had mentioned the unusual acoustic resonance of the canyon, that it could hold an echo longer than any natural landform in the four corners, maybe longer than anywhere. But he hadn't realized it wasn't just holding sound, it was harvesting it. He thought of the burn-scarred tree, the one that hadn't cast a shadow, of the torn deer's jaw hanging from a juniper like a wind chime, of his own voice echoing back from a canyon that should have swallowed it in silence. And then, suddenly, he knew where it wanted him to go. Back to where the echo started. Back to the place where the sound had first been stolen. Nathan rose to his feet. His knees buckled, and the room spun like a carousel of static, but he steadied himself. Picked up the broken recorder. It felt warm in his hand. Alive, even. Outside, the air had thickened with mist that hadn't been there moments before. But it wasn't fog from temperature or moisture. It was sound. A kind of pressure in the shape of a mist, a condensation of voice. He stepped into it. From behind him, faint and uncoordinated, came the echo of his own footsteps, slightly ahead of him. And the recorder whispered, "Hurry, it's almost learned how to finish your sentence." Chapter 12. The voice that spoke last the Firewatch Tower was silent now. Silent in the way a gutted church is silent, form intact, purpose stolen. Elijah sat at the edge of the cot, fingers trembling, tape recorder gripped like a holy relic. The device no longer needed fresh batteries. It fed on something else now, something colder. Outside, the canyon stretched into a black gullet, the pines along its lip shivering in winds that no longer obeyed weather patterns but carried the cadence of mimicry. He could hear it now, clearer than ever, not through the recorder, not through any static or filter, just outside, just below the deck. his own voice. It was saying things he hadn't said. Not yet. I let it in. I wore your name. I remembered how to be you. The voice didn't need to bang on the door. It didn't need to break the lock. It had already trespassed through resonance. It had mapped the pitch of Elijah's grief, catalogued the timbre of his loneliness. Every hissed prayer, every whispered thought, it had siphoned them, molecule by molecule, like pulling marrow from bone. He played the tape one last time. Don't follow the howls, said a child's voice, hollow as wind through reeds. They're not calling for help, they're rehearsing your name. Elijah stood. The tower felt smaller, like the walls had thickened with breath not his own. He turned to the window where the mountains once loomed, but now just a mirrored night sky. Empty, except it wasn't. Far off at the edge of the forest, a figure stood, not moving, not walking, just existing wrong, like a stutter in film, like something held still by pressure, not muscle. And then the thing raised its hand and waved, slowly, casually, affectionately, not to beckon him, to tell him he was already here. Elijah's mouth moved, but no words came. The recorder clicked again, but this time no tape word. Just the clean, sharp click of a device beginning playback, of something that had been recorded without his knowledge, of something that had recorded him. It's not the howl that's dangerous, said his own voice. It's the moment it stops, because then you realize it was waiting for your silence. The air grew viscous, almost tactile, like breath you had to wade through. He turned slowly toward the open door of the tower, and there stood a second Elijah. No, not Elijah. It wore his face like a thrifted mask, wrong tension around the eyes, lips a second behind the thoughts, a creature rehearsing humanity like a script still half-learned. Its mouth opened, and from it came a chorus, every voice Elijah had ever recorded, every child, every mimic, every borrowed howl. Then, at last, it asked, "Do you remember what you sounded like before you heard me?" Elijah couldn't answer, because he didn't remember, not anymore. The wind shifted, and somewhere in the ravine below, the howling began again. Only this time it was his voice in all of them, and the recorder, now set on the windowsill, clicked one final time. Playback started. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video. Subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.